everyone. My name is Zorina Dimitrova. I train people on starting a business with meaning, with a holistic approach to their love lives, social lives, life in general. So today I'm here with an interesting topic, the topic of relationships, but not only love relationships, relationships in general, and how they affect our lives and our business lives. So we all know that if we had a good relationship with our partners, colleagues, suppliers, bosses, employees, we're much better off doing business. This is clear. And one way to achieve this is to use practical psychology. And a lot of business is about practical psychology. We only think that we use a lot of our logical minds and we use tools and methods, but it's really all about relationships. So today I'm going to be talking about 5 attitudes, skills that you should have if you'd like to have good relationships and start a business successfully on a good foot. I'm going to give you these skills within stories. I'm going to tell you stories, short stories, some from my personal life and some from books that I've read or stories that I've heard. So before I begin with my stories, I'd like you to think for a second. When we talk about relationships, do you only think about your own benefit when you have a good relationship with somebody? We all know that if we have a good attitude, we receive better results, we have better relationships with people. But we do this only with selfish reasons, out of selfish reasons. However, we as a part of society have a responsibility for anyone else. And this is what I think needs to be brought back as a consciousness, as a way of thinking to people, that we are all responsible for each other. So in a way, your attitude, as you'll hear from some of the stories, also shapes the way other people are, other people act, other people behave, and what they achieve. So it's not only about you. You're responsible for your results with your own attitude, but you also carry responsibility to other people. So without making it too boring or preachy, let me jump into the stories. The first story has to do with our attitude, the aspect of expectations. A few years ago at Harvard, there was a research made by a professor on the attitude people had towards test mice. And so the professor separated 3 groups of students and he assigned 3 groups of mice to the students. He told the first group of students, I'm giving you genius mice. These mice are amazing, so you better buy them the best cheese because they really know what's at the end of the maze. The goal was that the mice go through a maze, and the ones who went faster to find the cheese, they were considered smarter. So they were clearly testing the behaviors of mice. And so the first group of students were told, these mice are geniuses, buy them exquisite cheese. They'll get there in no time. The second group of students were told their mice were just average. And the professor said, don't expect anything special from these mice. They're just average mice. Whatever you do, you're not going to change too much, so don't even bother. And with the third group of mice, he told the students, this group of mice, they're playing dumb, so don't even buy them cheese. It doesn't make any difference. It will still take them forever to get to the other end of the maze. And so what do you think the results were? Whatever you think is right. Because in the end, the ones that had the genius mice had mice that got to the end of the labyrinth much faster, times faster than the ones that had the dumb mice that weren't even given the cheese to attract them. So yeah, you would say this is all about, and to tell you the truth, these were not mice that were taken from various families or various breeds, or they were trained differently. These were mice from the same litter. So you couldn't assign the difference in performance to other genetic criteria. It was all about the attitude of people towards the mice. And you would say now, yes, but these are mice. What about people? Well, the same test continued with primary school students. This time, the students were separated in two groups, in two classes. There was no class for the dumb ones because it's not humane. And so the teachers in the school were told, this class is composed of students that are geniuses. Just give them as much work, as much homework, as many tasks as you like. They can do it. They'll manage. They'll sometimes pretend that they don't understand you or they don't want to answer. Just ignore that. They're just playing with you. They're super geniuses. The second group of students were told, the second group of teachers were told, your class is just average students. Treat them normally. Give them the regular homework that they're supposed to do, and expect average results. They're just normal children. A year passed, and lo and behold, the group with the genius students was ahead by 1 year in their studies. So they really met the expectations of the teachers. With this said, this is the first aspect of attitude that you should adopt and really think about it. There are so many cases of children that had ADHD and they were diagnosed with psychological diseases when they were children, and their parents were told, your child wouldn't be able to speak or wouldn't be able to lead a normal human life. They practically would be nailed to a wheelchair. And a few years later, they were all proven wrong, but it all depended on the attitude of the parent. And there's this example, I don't know if you've watched the video by Jason Burnett. The video is called Forget What You Know. And it is all about a child that was diagnosed with ADHD, but his mom decided to take him off the schooling system and to teach him at home. And so the child developed so well that when he was, I believe, 10 or 11 years old, he was already solving university. He was already enrolled in university, and he was solving university math problems. So it is all about our attitude, how we classify people. We either give them a chance or we don't. It's not only about children, though. This is also about grown-ups, as you will see in my second story. Now, the second story is about, wait a second, I have a few they're quite similar because these are all aspects of attitude. So my second story is about the way we find the treasures within people, the good side of them, the way we find the positives in people rather than the negatives. I'm sure that you all have friends, or you've come across situations when you've been in a social setting where somebody says something else about a new person they had just met. This is really digging out the bad out of somebody, but you can dig out the good in somebody very easily. About 9 years ago, when I was doing my MBA, there came a new professor in entrepreneurship, and his culture was a bit different than the culture of the rest of the professors. His most famous quote was, "Cash flow is more important than your mom." So this was a bit extreme for most of the faculty and the students there, this attitude in general. And he was not looked down upon, but people just didn't like him. And at that time, I was on the board of the entrepreneurship club. And the clubs usually have a lot of power because they're the connection between the university, the faculty, and the outside world. So naturally, professors want to associate to business clubs and collaborate with them. So the professor approached me, and I had heard all these things about him, but nevertheless, I didn't take him. I took him as what do you call that? I took him with an open heart, not with any prejudice about the way he is or the way he could be. So after a while, our relationship developed so well that he invited me a few times to be a judge on a panel for a few companies. He found me an internship. And this year, so that is 9 years after graduation, he wrote me an email and he invited me to be on the panel of judges for elevator pitch contest. So when you create a good connection, when you approach somebody with a positive attitude, with no prejudice that this person is negative, you open yourself for positive interactions and you create long-term relationships. As you can see, this person remembered me 9 years afterwards, and there was always a good feeling about our collaboration. The third aspect of attitude has to do with recognition. When you recognize people, you prove to them that they're good. You establish the trait that they have turned into a behavior or into an action. So you recognize people for their achievements. There's a difference when you recognize them and praise them for their qualities, for their innate abilities, for their talents. This is praising. But when you recognize somebody, it's usually for something that they've done. And here's another example from my personal life. When I was working in corporate, I had a colleague, about 50-something-year-old lady, a very intelligent lady, but a bit slow in explaining her points of view. And people wouldn't have the patience to listen to her, which I thought was that was the culture of the company. But I thought that was a big mistake, because you were missing on so much of the input that she had to give. And not only that, she was feeling bad. You know, she would close herself even more, and a whole chain of negative consequences based on the way people interrupted her and didn't let her speak and didn't have patience with her. So at one of our meetings, she tried to say something, somebody interrupted her, and she blushed completely, and she closed up and, you know, stopped speaking. And so I said, well, this was really interesting, what you said. Let's call her Josie. I find your input great. Can we please let her speak, because this was really amazing. And she spoke. People listened to her. And you wouldn't believe, out of this small recognition that I did, this was really a tiny thing, but it made such a tremendous change, because the meetings after, she had transformed. She didn't blush anymore. She would become completely red. But she didn't blush anymore. She would speak freely. She wouldn't let people interrupt her. This developed gradually, but you could see that this was the turning point. So the way we recognize people, and us recognizing people in the first place, not taking their qualities and their actions for granted. This is very important, not only for work relationships, business relationships, but for the relationship with your spouse. Recognition is one of the main things that people need, and taking for granted is one of the main taking somebody for granted is one of the main reasons people fall out of love in a love relationship. We're going to talk about the other two main reasons at the end of this video. Now let me continue with the 5 attitudes and the 5 short stories. Another aspect of attitude is praise. As I said, recognition is recognizing somebody's activities, achievements, somebody's actions. And praise is recognizing what they're born with, even their physical appearance, but also their qualities, their talents, everything that they have that is given to them from nature. There's this story now about a little girl that sang really well when she was a child. She was the best in her town, and she would do performances. After performances, she'd be invited to theaters and schools to perform. Her parents gathered the money that they had, and they booked her the best music teacher in town, because they wanted her to reach heights in her career. So she started studying with this teacher, and over time, as she became a teenager and a young lady, she fell in love with her teacher, because she looked up to him. It happens very often that we fall in love with people that we look up to. They got married, had children, and bit by bit, her career faded away. She stopped singing, people stopped calling her. After some years of marriage, I believe her first husband either passed away or they separated, but she married again. And she remarried to a salesperson who was an affluent person. And when she was humming as a happy housewife and singing, her husband always told her, "Honey, you sing so incredibly well. I love your singing. Sing a little bit more." And so he encouraged her and praised her. And after a while, people noticed her again, started inviting her for gigs. Her friends started recognizing that she could actually sing well. And so her career picked up only after she was praised by somebody, only after her talent was recognized. Because the first husband that she had, the music teacher, he was very expecting of her. He was very critical of every mistake that she made, because as a teacher he wanted to correct everything and make her perfect, but he didn't recognize the talent and the abilities that she already had. He didn't praise her. He was looking for the minuses, not for the pluses. And this is how the faith of this woman was changed, because somebody saw her talent again. Yeah, this is the aspect number 4, which is of our attitudes towards people. And the 5th one is about seeing the potential in them. Very often people just need somebody to point out what they don't see. This is what usually happens to people. Even if you're with experts in astrology, psychology, anything related to the improvement of your mind, lifestyle, anything, you need somebody to tell you what's behind you, to see you in a 360 circle, because you don't see yourself. You may think you know yourself best, but as you've heard from a lot of the astrologers on Astrolada, they cannot read properly their own chart. It's very difficult to observe yourself and to analyze yourself, or let alone even predict for yourself. That's why you need another person to look at you from a different perspective. And the same thing is when we look for the potential in somebody. We can discover our own potentials, but it's different when somebody tells you and points your consciousness towards your potential. So the story, it goes about a businessman who was traveling with the underground. This is a story from a book by Zig Ziglar that came out, I believe, 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, in the 80s. It's called See You at the Top. And in this story, it tells about a business person who goes to the underground and he sees a beggar. And while waiting for the train, he throws a few coins in the cup of the beggar. And then he stops for a second. He thinks for a second, goes back, and picks up 2 of the pencils that the beggar was selling. And he tells him, "Oh, excuse me very much. I forgot to pick up my merchandise, and you're selling a fairly priced merchandise. You're a business person yourself, so I apologize for not for forgetting to take my merchandise." And by doing this, he missed his train, but he took the next train. And a few years later, months later, not even years, a few months later, they met at a social gathering. Well, only one of them knew they met each other, because the businessman who took the pencils didn't recognize the other person. The beggar had transformed. He had clean clothes. He had started a new life. So this whole attitude, and he came up to him and told him the whole story of his life after they had met, and thanked him for pointing out the potential that he had as a businessman, as a business person, and seeing him in a different light, not as a simple beggar, but as somebody who has something to offer to other people. Yes, seeing the potential in people. Sometimes this can change lives. And as I said at the beginning, we all have responsibility towards other people, towards the society, towards improving life on earth in general. So when we talk about our attitudes, it shouldn't be only a practical psychology tool for us to achieve our own goals, for us to have better relationships, for us to do better in business, which we will for sure do. It's also about seeing the potential in other people and improving other people's lives by the way we see them, by our attitudes. And now, without making this talk too long, I'm simply going to touch on 3 short points about love relationships. I know you have experts on love here, but I'd also like to make my contribution on the topic of love. And this has to do also with our attitudes. The 3 main reasons people fall out of love and love relationships break are: number 1, we take people for granted. Number 2, neglect. All these are consequences of the attitudes that we spoke about, the 5 attitudes. But the most important point here is that it has to do with lack of consciousness. We take our consciousness, our focus away from the person, and we move it elsewhere. If you think about all problems in a marriage, it's all about the lack of attention, the lack of consciousness, because otherwise we'd be doing certain things to keep the fire alive. And the third, also very important reason why relationships fail is the lack of morals, the societal acceptance of lack of morals. It's become a norm that people cheat. It's become a norm that people watch porn. I'm not here to judge, but I've watched and researched a lot of psychological studies on the negative aspects of watching porn. But again, overall, the lack of morals, it makes it easier for people to change partners, to exit the relationship, doesn't stimulate them to work on the existing relationship. So as I said, it all has to do with where you put your consciousness. I hope you enjoyed that. Please check out my program, Start a Business with Meaning, where I talk about relationships and more in depth about love relationships, not only about the psychological aspect, but also about the spiritual aspect. If you haven't seen my other 2 videos where I talk about how to find your purpose and about the top 5 business models, these were only tidbits of the 3-month program that I have already started. That will lead you to starting a business with meaning. The program consists of spiritual tools, psychology tools, and business tools. We've already had the first 2 sessions on spirituality, and we're moving on towards psychology in the coming sessions. You can still join, and the discount that I'm giving are still valid, and they will be below the video. Enjoy, and remember, you have the responsibility, you have the power to improve your life and the lives of others as well. Thank you.